in last week, and it won't go away because people travel and we travel every day. We are a long, thin country, and the tyranny of distance is true for most of us. If we want to get somewhere, we generally have to fly these days because road transport, rail, and ship are not conveyances that get us there very quickly at all. But we have really a monopolistic carrier in this country, very little competition in our internal airlines. Air New Zealand, 51%, I think, not 100%, but 51% owned by the New Zealand taxpayer, therefore by the government, has been charging what appear to be usurious prices for air travel in this country, using, in particular, it would seem, a pricing algorithm that punishes you not just for traveling late, but in actual fact for traveling at a time when people want to travel. So even if you want to book ahead, you'll find that you can't because they're keeping seats available. Those seats are then going to be charged out at an exorbitant rate, and that is the pricing algorithm that Air New Zealand runs. Well, you've heard my views on this particular issue last week, but in response to not just my views, but outrage throughout generally New Zealand, commercial and consumers alike, there is a view that Air New Zealand is price gouging New Zealanders, that they are not, in actual fact, our national airline, that they are, at the end of the day, rapacious bastards who have exploited their monopoly position. And in the past, they have exploited that position to drive out competition on particularly provincial routes when they find there is competition with predatory pricing and the like as well. In response to this last week, the Minister of the South Island, a recently appointed position, and a first-term MP, but considered to be more than politically able to handle this particular role by Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, James Meager put out a press release or made public comments last week to the tune essentially that this was the number one issue for him and his portfolio, and to see what he's going to do about it, if anything, and how we can be freed from the privations of what appear to be a privateer company. James Meager, the Minister, joins us now. Thank you, Minister. So pleased to have you on. Welcome to the show.
Morning, Michael. Good to be back.
Good on you, mate. Listen, you said this was your number one priority last week, or at least you're quoted as saying that in the media. I can never really rely upon it 100%. But this, is that true? Is Air New Zealand and its connectivity or air prices and operations in this country your number one priority at the moment?
The whole picture is, so the whole idea around regional connectivity is a big priority, and I would say it'd be close to, if not the number one priority for the Ministry of South Island. Not sure if you can see my screen, but behind me there's a map of the South Island, and you know it very well as well, Michael. It's a very large landmass, and we are relatively geographically isolated. So our air connectivity is really important. So part of that is reliability of service, part of that is appropriate travel schedules, and the other side of it is the cost of air travel. And you hit the nail on the head. Our travel numbers haven't yet recovered to pre-COVID levels, yet our airfares have close to doubled. So there's got to be something done in that space around the competition aspect and around how many small players and other players we can get into the market.
Is that the solution that you anticipate, the encouragement of competition?
I think that's one of the solutions. I think if you look at the routes where there is significant competition, you'll find that both the reliability of those routes is high and also the airfares are low. So if you look at anywhere where Jetstar travels around the country, the competition factor means that New Zealand have to compete. If you look at those routes where there is only a single flyer, you know, it speaks for itself. So that's part of the answer. The other thing we can do is look at what are the costs going into these airfares. Some of that are the costs that government put on operators and airports. Some of it are the costs of wages and the general inflation crisis that we've been hit with over the past few years. And the other thing is the airport infrastructure. What can we as a government do to invest in the infrastructure to make sure that airports keep their landing fees low? All of that mixes into a very complicated issue, which at the end of the day, what we are focused on is making sure that isolated New Zealanders like those on the West Coast, like those down the deep south, can get to where they need to go, whether that's for a wedding or a funeral or to do business.
Okay, let's look at the the way in which Air New Zealand's dealt with competition when it's been on regional routes in the past, it's deliberately dropped its airfares in those areas to undercut that particular service, forced that particular business out of business, or in some cases just simply purchased it and then just closed it down, and then hiked those regional routes back, fares back to levels that didn't exist before the competition even came along, and therefore gouged regional folk, not just in the South Island, but throughout the whole entire country. You own, well, when I say you, your government owns 51% of this airline. Surely you can have some influence over that kind of anti-competitive model that Air New Zealand is running.
Yeah, and I think you're right when you said that it's not me, and it's actually not even the government. The taxpayer owns 50% of the airline. Look, I'll be a bit cautious around that because they are decisions and comments of the shareholding ministers. I'm not a shareholding minister. I'm sort of on the regulatory side of things. And the overall regulator for competition and fair prices is the Commerce Commission. And I know that the Commerce Minister is looking into what's happening with the airports, and I know he's also interested in what's happening with airfares as well. So there might be some news in that space shortly. In terms of what we can do to make
Are
sure
you
that
aware
the
of, so you're aware of
airline,
policy work in that area, are you, Minister?
certainly around whether or not the airport pricing is fair. There was the Commerce Commission review of Auckland's air fees a while ago, a couple of weeks ago. And as the minister sort of responsible for aviation, I'm also looking at what are the costs that civil aviation put onto airports and airlines. And under the new Civil Aviation Act, there are some increased powers for the government to start looking at things like transparency around airfare reporting and seeing what we can do in that space to put a bit of pressure on the airlines as well. And there are extremes you can go to, which I don't think anyone would want to get into around actually directly interfering with the prices. I don't think that helps the market. So we're looking at it from what can we do to encourage transparency and fairness and more competition in the market.
But there's no market at the moment. I mean, that's the issue here, is there? I mean, if you've got a monopoly supplier and you've only got one people flying one route, there's no market. When you talk about, I don't want to interfere with the market, there isn't a market. It's just a monopoly.
That's a fair comment insofar as regional routes. I think that's actually fair. I think when you look at the main centres that are reasonably well serviced, there is a good operating competitive market because you've got the likes of Jetstar in there and you've got some of the smaller operators that will fly in and out of Wellington and Auckland to places like Westport and Whangarei and the East Coast. But you're right, with the smaller regional areas where there is only one operator on those routes, there isn't a functioning market. So as a government, we can look at what do we do around transparency. So when we look at on-time performance of the flight, we know how reliable the flights are to the main centres. We have no transparency as to how reliable they are to the regions. So we're going to be looking at extending that reporting towards the end of May, so that the public knows exactly how their regional airport and airline fares compared to the big players, and hopefully put a bit of pressure on the operators to improve there. And then there are other things that the government can look at doing in terms of supporting regional connectivity. And that's everything from investing in regional airports, and we saw a little bit of that on the West Coast over the past month with some investments going into Hokitika, all the way through to does the government look at securing some regional routes or putting some sort of public service requirement on operators who want to operate in New Zealand to make sure that regional routes are maintained. And I'm thinking particularly ones where populations are low, so the West Coast, maybe the East Coast of the North Island, maybe places like Timaru where there's only 4 flights a day and people choose to go to Christchurch. What can the government do in that space about almost securing routes without going so far as to subsidise particular airlines?
Does Air New Zealand, do you think, understand that the way in which it's approaching this issue, particularly internally, and its responses too, is actually driving people like myself and others to actively boycott Air New Zealand internationally when we travel and go on other airlines because we don't want to reward them for their predatory behaviour internally in this country? Do you think they realise the reputational risk that they're running at the moment?
Yeah, I would hope that's not the case. That I would hope that we would be in a position where we can continue to support the national carrier. Look, I've met with Air New Zealand quite a few times. They are very aware of the reputational risks of not serving the region. They are very much committed to the regions. But at the end of the day, I'm not really here to defend Air New Zealand as well. They've got a big, well-oiled communications team that they can, I'm sure, take on board your concerns and make sure that they are operating in a way which
Well, yeah,
doesn't
but
lead
they
people like
don't.
yourself
I
to
mean,
go and boycott them.
but listen. I'm delighted you're here, and good on you, and thank you. But the reality is that Air New Zealand doesn't like to be interviewed on these issues. It doesn't like to be challenged. It likes to put out press releases. You've talked about a well-oiled communications machine, but gee, it's not one that's very answerable to direct questions at the end of the day. The only thing that I saw, and can I share this with you, James, is that prior
Mm-hmm.
to just after COVID and Air New Zealand starts running again, they actually openly admitted that they were going to charge more on regional routes because that's where they could make a profit, subsidize their international routes because they had competition on those. Does that seem a fair business model to you?